Good morning to you, and thank us from Kenya, and then we shall look at some regional headlines as well. The Standard newspaper, Raila's 10 tough demands for Ruto in its first major public engagement after August 9th. Polls opposition flexes muscle and asks that the president returns to the people's agenda by reinstating script subsidies, enhancing social safety net, and halting unilateral IEBC reconstitution. The story is on page 5. Ruto breaks ground for 30 billion Kenya shillings railway city mega project. That story is on page 7. New boost for power connections. You'll find that on page 22. Sharp split after boarding schools ban. Education stakeholders are divided over the government's decision to ban boarding schools for grade 6 to 9 learners, saying the move must be well thought out. That story is on page 8. The Star newspaper, storm over plan to scrape boarding schools. Association wants the policy halted, at least for now, to give room for adjustment. You'll find that on page 4 and 5. Man kills self after poisoning, stabbing his 4 children. The story is in there. Security chiefs linked to South Sudan illicit activities. Kenya and its top security bosses have been implicated in the human rights abuses and laundering of illicit cash from South Sudan. A Dunning report exposes how they aided to perpetuate their atrocities. All right. That is interesting. I guess the story is on page 6 on the Star newspaper. Kitengela 4 family hangs on Ruto's word. You'll find that on page 21, and the main pictorial. Raila fires warning salvo to Ruto. The first one is yesterday. And then just below that is ODM leader Raila Odinga, Kalonzo Musyoka, Martha Karua at Kamukunji grounds in Nairobi yesterday. They had that rally. Something like that. The Daily Nation, MPs in a fix over opposition office. President William Ruto's Kenya Kwanza alliance is facing a big headache to avoid a costly referendum in its bid to create a powerful office for Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition party leader Raila Odinga. All right, so that is what we have. And all right, up there, Nutback's ban on boarding primary schools, and Raila's New Year battle with Ruto, and Congo peace efforts, and Padium saga. That is all in there. So just a look at some regional newspapers. And from Zimbabwe, the limitation report rattles ZANU-PF. That is the main headline. The Herald, that is from South Africa. Age not barrier to educational pursuit. Totally agree with that. You can always go back to school, whatever your age is, and pursue your dreams. Yes. The Nation from Nigeria. Cash withdrawal limit policy. Senators, experts knock the Central Bank of Nigeria, and I think I was talking about this yesterday in the afternoon show. There's been some cap on how much Nigerians from January, I think 9th of January or something like that, how much Nigerians can withdraw in a day and how much they can withdraw in a week. And I think if you want to get more of that, then you have to go straight to the teller and not through the ATM. I think they're trying to introduce some rules there. You know, Nigeria just around people are doing business and keeping guests in the house. So those are just some of the radical changes that the country's financial, the Central Bank of Nigeria has been undertaking, and a lot of this, I guess, have not been received quite well. Okay. The Guardian, also from Nigeria. Agents in uproar as Senate debates new policy on Tuesday. I think on the same matter that I'm talking to you about. The Daily Monitor from Uganda. Court strikes out acting judge jobs. Okay. And the New Vision as well from Uganda. MPs, okay. Ministers censure process. Censure process. That's how you say that. Very well. Sowetan from South Africa, very strict conditions for Walus. Remember the guy who shot apartheid hero, Chris Hani? I think he was released yesterday. That I do have that news in detail in just a short bit. Pretoria news from South Africa. ATM takes Phala Phala fight to the Concord. Very well. And the News Times, that is from Rwanda. The New Times, cheer or shear, I don't know how they say it, seed auction halted as dispute rages. That's what you have there. The Citizen from Tanzania Investment Index ranks Tanzania highly in Africa. A new report has ranked Tanzania among the best investment destinations in Africa, courtesy of its strong regulatory framework, sound microeconomic fundamentals, and vibrant financial market. Samia's new plan for CCM on mandatory insurance rules for public amenities coming by Patrick Mpambe from our radio section, the other side of the office. Mpambe, good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you, Miriam. Bila shaka tutangazia kwa Kiswahili taarifa za leo huku upande wa redio, na bila shaka taarifa za leo zinaarifu kwamba mamia ya wanaharakati, maafisa na wataalamu wamekusanyika mjini Washington kutafuta njia za kukomesha ufisadi katika serikali, taasisi na mifumo mbalimbali duniani. Mamia ya wanaharakati, maafisa wa wataalamu wamekusanyika kule na kongamano la siku 5 ambalo huandaliwa kila baada ya miaka miwili na taasisi ya Transparency International kuangazia ufisadi duniani, na nchi mwenyeji wa mkutano huu ambapo inakadiriwa kikao hicho ni kikubwa kabisa cha kimataifa kuhusu vita dhidi ya ufisadi. Alafu taarifa nyingine ambayo pia imegonga vichwa vya habari ni kwamba Rais wa Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Congo Felix Tshisekedi anaonekana kumjibu mwenzake wa Rwanda Paul Kagame kutokana na matamshi kwamba kiongozi huyo wa Congo huenda anasababisha mzozo wa vita nchini mwake ili kuchelewesha uchaguzi mkuu. Alikuwa anahutubia viongozi wa mikoa Tshisekedi akisema kwamba raia wa Rwanda sio maadui wa Congo, lakini utawala wa Rwanda ndio adui wa Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Congo. Taarifa pia imegonga vichwa vya habari kule Tanzania ni kwamba Rais wa Tanzania Samia Suluhu Hassan amefuta sherehe za siku ya uhuru zilizokuwa kule Ijumaa, ama kuelekeza kuwa bajeti iliyotengwa kwa ajili ya shughuli hiyo badala yake itumike Mozambique, ambako mahakama moja imewahukumu wakuu wawili wa zamani wa ujasusi na mtoto wa rais wa zamani kifungo cha miaka 12 jela kila mmoja kwa kuhusika kwao katika kashfa ya ufisadi, ambapo serikali ilificha madeni makubwa na kusababisha mzozo wa kifedha nchini humo. Miongoni mwa washtakiwa 13 walioshtumiwa kubwa nchini humo ni mtoto wa rais wa zamani Amando Gwebuza Ndambi, mkuu wa zamani wa idara ya usalama wa ujasusi Gregorio Yao, na mkuu wa zamani wa idara ya ujasusi kuhusu masuala ya uchumi ambaye aliongoza kampuni 3 za serikali zilizokopa mabilioni ya pesa katika njia isiyo halali, Antonio do Rosario. Kufikia hapo ndipo nafika mwisho wa uchambuzi wa magazeti ama uchambuzi wa habari ambazo zimegonga vichwa vya habari hapa Afrika. Na bila shaka nikukumbusha tu wasikilizaji wetu kwamba wanaweza kusikiliza radio hii kuendelea kupata burudani kupitia kwa www.punchlineafricatv.com/ kwenye Radio Garden app unaweza tupata, na vile vile Simple Radio app unaweza tupata. Kumbuka kwamba unaweza kuungana nasi kwa news mbalimbali vya mtandao wa kijamii: Facebook Radio Punchline Africa, Twitter @radio_punchline. Good morning, Miriam. Thank you for having me on the show.
Okay, thank you so much. That is Patrick Mpambe. And for our viewers who are watching who are not from East Africa and you don't understand, that is Kiswahili, the national language here in Kenya and some other African countries, indeed in East Africa. And I think this is there has been some campaigns that Kiswahili should be made, Africa's language, and I think I do have them here. So let's just get into what is happening. Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining me this morning. We go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the M23 rebel group in the Democratic Republic of Congo has condemned a genocide and targeted killings against the Tutsi community by government forces and its allies in the east. It said the government's coalition forces had on Tuesday attacked their positions in Buiza and its surroundings in total breach of the current ceasefire. The M23 said government allies forces had killed innocent civilians, destroying houses, looting and slaughtering their cattle, noting that the ongoing attacks had displaced citizens and wounded many. The group has said that it will not stand by and watch as civilian populations get killed, adding that it is ready to intervene and stop these horrific massacres. Now, the army has not spoken about the allegations, but had last week accused the M23 of killing dozens of civilians in the eastern town of Kishishe. The statement by the M23 comes after the group agreed to withdraw from occupied territory following sustained pressure from the government and international community, following resolutions agreed on by heads of states during a recent meeting in the Angolan capital, Luanda. Over 50 Congolese armed groups that attended peace talks which were concluded this week in Nairobi, also announced that they had agreed to lay down their weapons. And the Reuters news agency says it has found evidence that the Nigerian military ran a secret mass abortion program for at least 9 years, targeted at women who had children by Boko Haram militants. Many of the women had been kidnapped and raped by the Islamist militants in the country's northeast. The scale of the alleged program is shocking. At least 10,000 women are thought to have had pregnancies terminated without consent. Procedures are said to have taken place as recently as November of last year. Reuters was unable to establish who in the military or government created or ran the abortion program. South Africa's Tourism Minister Lindiwe Sisulu has called on President Cyril Ramaphosa to resign. President Ramaphosa is facing allegations that he covered up the theft of a huge sum of money from his firm. The controversy comes ahead of next month's ANC conference, with the president seeking a second term in office. Ms. Sisulu, who says she wants the top job herself, told the BBC News Hour program that Mr. Ramaphosa should step down as he was holding the whole party to ransom. Next week, Parliament is due to discuss the issue, and the president, who denies any wrongdoing, could potentially face impeachment. An exhibition about Eritrea's disappeared former government officials and journalists has been launched in the UK Parliament. On Tuesday, MPs from All-Party Parliamentary Group for Eritrea, APPG, called for the release of the disappeared and improvement of human rights in Eritrea. Lord Alton of Liverpool, who has been critical of Eritrea's human rights situation, said the exhibition would help highlight the plight of the missing. Among those detained since September 2001 are former senior ministers, members of the now suspended National Assembly, and senior military generals. The group of officials known as G15 wrote an open letter demanding accountability and democratic reforms. Patrick Grady, a British SNP Member of Parliament who spoke at the exhibition's launch, spoke of the devastating stories he has heard over the years, the testimonies that brought the government also shut down all private newspapers and arrested many of its editors and journalists. The arrested have never appeared in any court of law and have been held incommunicado for over 20 years. Human rights groups say there are many others who have disappeared after their arrest by security authorities since 1991. The humanitarian community in South Sudan has strongly condemned the ongoing violence in the oil-producing Upper Nile state in the northern part of the country. They are calling for hostilities to cease immediately in order to reduce human suffering and prevent further loss of innocent lives. The UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, reported on Wednesday that more than 9,100 people were displaced following the recent surge of violence in Fashoda County. The renewed clashes between armed youths have also resulted in civilian deaths and injuries, abductions of women and children, and the destruction of properties and livelihoods. There were also reports of incidences of gender-based violence, OCHA added. It did not provide details regarding casualties, but local media reported that countless numbers of people were killed in the renewed violence. A popular Nigerian artist, Oladapo Oyebanjo, popularly known as D'banj, has been arrested over alleged fraud. In a tweet on its official handle, the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, confirmed the arrest of the musician over allegedly fraudulent activities associated with the N-Power program, a government scheme set up to address youth unemployment and empowerment. The ICPC says it is investigating claims by N-Power beneficiaries who say they have not received money. Anti-apartheid hero Chris Honey has been released on parole a week after he was stabbed in prison. Janus Walus, 69, has been discharged under strict conditions for 2 years. The authorities say he shot Honey in 1993 in a failed attempt to derail South Africa's transition from a white minority government to democracy democratic rule, the killing still evokes deep emotions in South Africa. Hani was regarded as the most popular politician after Nelson Mandela, who went on to become the country's first black president in 1994. South Africa's government and Mr. Hani's widow Limpo have vigorously opposed Walu's attempts to gain his freedom. Members of the governing African National Congress, the ANC, the South African Communist Party, SACP, which Hani led, and the Congress of South African Trade Unions have also expressed anger over his release. In a ruling on the 21st of November of this year, South Africa's highest court ordered Walu's release within 10 days, saying the Justice Minister's refusal to grant him parole was irrational. And then just closer there to South Africa, in Mozambique, the son of former president has been jailed for 12 years over a vast $2.2 billion fishing project scandal that triggered an economic crisis in the country. Ndambi Gwembuza, son of the former president Armando Gwembuza, was among 11 people found guilty of embezzlement and money laundering. Kickbacks were also given to some senior politicians. The consequences of the crime, the judge said, who became chairperson of all newly created state companies that took the loans. Judge Batista said that they were expected to be guardians of public assets for being high-ranking leaders responsible for security, but instead they became the key culprits who committed these economic crimes against the people of Mozambique. And then we go to Chad. And the secretary of the Bar Association in Chad announced lawyers would appeal for the prosecution of the October 20th demonstrators. Last month, a court sentenced 263 people out of the 401 arrested. Following deadly protests in October, around 50 people, including 10 members of the security forces, died when police opened fire on demonstrators in the capital, Germana, and several other cities on October 20th, according to an official toll. Opposition groups denounced the official numbers and say the real count was much higher, alleging unarmed civilians were massacred. The protest had been called to mark the date when Chad's ruling military had initially promised to cede power, a timeline that has now been extended by 2 years. Strongman General Muhammad Idris Deby Itno accused the demonstrators of insurrection and attempting to stage a coup. And then to South Sudan, and the SPLM on Tuesday endorsed President Salva Kiir as the party's chairperson and the flag bearer for the upcoming general election in 2025, saying that Dr. John Garang had entrusted the nation to him. Now, this comes after 126 council members amended the party's constitution on Tuesday, December 6, 2022, to party members in Rumbek that Comrade Salva Kiir would lead South Sudanese to independence. He did, I think. And then now what? But SPLM isn't the main political party in the country, and it was initially founded as the political wing of the Sudan's People's Liberation Army in 1983. I do have some thoughts on that story, but let me just finish up with the rest of the news items, and we go on to Sao Tome and Principe. And the head of the government in Sao Tome and Principe, Patrice Trovoada, spoke of extrajudicial executions after the attempted push carried out by assailants on the night of November 24th and 25th at the army headquarters. After meeting with Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, he said he expected his country's judicial authorities, assisted by Lisbon, to produce a preliminary report on the events he reported on the December 25th before the end of the year. On that day, Travolta said that 4 assailants were captured after 6 hours of gunfire at the army headquarters in the capital, Sao Tome, and the 2 sponsors were later arrested at their homes, the former president of the outgoing National Assembly, Delphine Nerves, and another opponent, Alessio Costa. 2 days later, the army chief of staff announced that 3 of the detainees had died from sustained injuries in an explosion, without further details, and that Mr. Costa had also died jumping from a vehicle, and this has been put in quotes, but also that all soldiers who participated in the attempted push had been arrested. Many grey areas surround the circumstances and chronological events of Friday and the following days. The military says the rebels abducted 8 people this week, including road workers who were abandoning work sites due to insecurity. Cameroon says scores of government troops and road construction equipment of its military engineering corps are moving from Yaoundé to at least 6 western towns and villages on the border with Nigeria. The equipment that departed the capital Tuesday includes loaders, bulldozers, dump trucks, and compactors, the military says. Defense Minister Joseph Betty Asomo told Parliament this week that President Paul Biya ordered the military engineering corps to take over construction of the road linking the Kumba and the Kondot TD districts. Asomo said a majority of civilians road construction engineers abandoned work following repeated armed attacks and destruction of equipment by separatist fighters. He said army forces are capable of taking over the work. Asomo said beside its regular participation in combat operations, forces of Cameroon's military engineering corps are trained and have a wide range of experience in constructing public edifices, including buildings and roads. And he added that Biya, who is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, authorizes the military to construct roads in areas deemed necessary where there are armed conflicts. The road is part of government's efforts to reconstruct the western areas devastated by the separatist conflict that has claimed 3,500 lives and displaced 750,000 people so far. The government says 8 civilians, including road construction workers, were abducted by separatist fighters from a bus on Monday in Ekondi Titi. Separatists have claimed responsibility for the abductions but have not made any requests for ransom, and is usually the case when work following repeated attacks from armed Boko Haram fighters. And the Economic Community of West African State ECOWAS agreed at a summit last week to establish a regional peacekeeping force to fight terrorism and restore democracy after military coups. The ECOWAS standby force will be led by chiefs of defense staff of member nations with the stated aim of addressing terrorism and coup attempts among ECOWAS members. The force will also help restore democratic order in places where coups already have taken place. The 15-member West African bloc has seen many coups in the last 2 years, including ones in Mali and Guinea, and 2 this year in Burkina Faso. The 3 countries have been suspended from ECOWAS decision-making bodies. ECOWAS leaders say the coups have set back decades of democratic gains made in the region and have earned it a reputation of being unstable. ECOWAS member nations also are battling jihadist fighters operating across the borders, making it difficult for individuals, nations, security forces to address. Last week, the West African bloc told Mali's ruling junta to free 46 Ivorian troops who were sent to provide backup for the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, but have been held since July. Defense chiefs from member nations of ECOWAS will meet in January to discuss a way forward for the peacekeeping force. And police in northwestern Nigeria have launched a manhunt for gunmen who killed 6 people, including 4 police officers, at a market near the border with Niger. A spokesman for the Sokoto State Police Commander Sanusi Abubakar said armed men on motorcycles opened fire Tuesday on a police patrol team outside a market in Yarbalutu village. The attack killed 4 police officers, 2 traders. Abubakar told the Voice of Africa Wednesday that police were headed to the scene to investigate. And then we end by going back to South Sudan. President Salva Kiir said at the closing of the convention of the SPLM National Liberation Council on Tuesday, he cannot stop the war in the Upper Nile region. It is not clear why the head of the state made the remarks, but he said there were fighting going on in the eastern Nuer area and the Cholo Kingdom in the Upper Nile state. According to Kiir, those fighting, he said, are our brothers, and called on all the leaders to stop the war to bring peace to the people. The chairperson of the SPLM vowed that his leadership will not take the country back to war and revenge on those who are causing the problems. His remarks came a day after the Upper Nile state government said it was helpless to stop the violence in the restive region. You are joining us. I do understand our connection perhaps might not be very stable, but we're working on it, so just bear with us and hang on in there. It's getting better. They're fixing it, okay? Thank you so much. And so a lot is happening in Nigeria. I think the killings continue, and then you have this leading presidential candidate who can't even take questions or even attempt to address some of the issues. Tinubu, I was talking to you about him yesterday, and the reason why I think a lot of Nigerians were disappointed and frustrated, remember he was giving a talk at Chatham House, is because the questions that were posed to him are very pertinent and important to the people of Nigeria. And I'm saying this to say, because just now I just read several news items from Nigeria, and all of them have to do with insecurity. All of them have to do with insecurity, and insecurity in West Africa is something that is of concern, and that's why anybody who seeks to want to lead Nigeria, I think, must have a plan on how they will tackle the issue of insecurity in that country, because we know the current leadership has done very little to really address effectively, if at all they even attempted to do that, to address the issue of insecurity in Nigeria. And that's why I think Tinubu's failure to really take on this matter head on, and then he had the audacity to point at his aides to respond to these questions that were posed to him at Chatham House. And going there, he understood very well that if you go to Chatham House, you're invited there, you give a talk, after you're done. So he decided he will not answer these questions. Instead, when they were being posed to him, and these questions are very pertinent, he directed his aides to answer on his behalf, and he was present. I think that is very disrespectful, and I talked about it yesterday, so I'll not get into it. So what I'm saying is, anybody who is seeking leadership in Nigeria, I think the people of Nigeria must interrogate their agenda, must interrogate what they really, how they plan to address the issue of insecurity in Nigeria. That has become a serious problem, and it's just not in Nigeria, but in other parts of the Sahel region and the West Africa region. But particularly in Nigeria, it is troubling, because we know Boko Haram now started in Nigeria. The leadership in Nigeria said, when President Buhari was being elected for his first term, he said, in the first 100 days, Boko Haram will be a thing of the past. And he gave other myriad of promises that much of them have come to naught. I don't know, but Nigerians will understand the scorecard. So you can rate your president and how he has performed. But I know as far as security is concerned, from the information we get from Nigeria and how we see this insecurity continue to go out of hand, maybe he has not done as much as the people of Nigeria would have wanted him to do. And so Boko Haram formed and fermented in Nigeria. The country could not get a hold of it. The government could not do much to stop it. And now it has become a problem in Cameroon. It has become a problem in other countries. That is the problem. That is the problem. And was it yesterday I had a news here where they were fighting. There was a fight between Boko Haram and another terrorist group, the Islamic State. And it had escalated, 33 ISWAP fighters, wives and rivalry escalate. So Boko Haram, I think ISWAP had the Islamic State of West African had attacked Boko Haram, and then Boko Haram decided to lay a trap on them, say, okay, fine, come, we're willing to talk and all that. So Boko Haram went ahead and murdered the ISWAP fighters' wives. So they murdered about 33. So these are terrorists fighting within themselves. That is how far it has gotten. And it is interesting, because when I was reading this news here yesterday, and the details from this news item, and where these places happened and these positions, and how even these journalists were able to collect all this information and the intelligence, you wonder, does the security officers in Nigeria even attempt to go and find these guys? They know their locations. The ISWAP positions in Ukuba, in Ara, in Sabil Huda, in Farisu. The government knows this place. They know their hideouts. They do understand, but the government has not done much to try and find them. So if we can have a detailed news item telling us even where these people are situated, in the Mandara Mountain and these other areas, and they continue to do what they do, fine. The other time they're fighting within themselves, but the rest of the times they're attacking the civilians in Nigeria, and they're killing the innocent people of Nigeria. And we know very well where they are, but they're not even, genuine attempts to try to get a hold of them. And then you wonder, so what is going on there? in Nigeria. So other killings have happened again. This time police officers have been murdered in a certain area. And so analysts are quite skeptical, as much as they feel that this ECOWAS peacekeeping mission force is a good thing. But I think this peacekeeping force is for other things. I don't know why they're not forming a force to fight the jihadist attacks in that area, in the West African region. I know France formed the G5 for the Sahel region, which Mali was part of, and Chad, but Mali left. So after Mali left, it did leave a huge gap there. So I don't know why. Fine, I do understand that they're forming this West Africa peacekeeping force to try to intervene in member states because of the coups that have been happening in that part of Africa. The last 2 years, about 4 coups have happened. We've seen a coup happen in Mali, in Guinea, and twice in Burkina Faso. Remember the junta that removed President not Ibrahim Boubacar, Christian Kabore. That was the president of Burkina Faso, right? And then I think he's still being held. After that, 8 months later, another army came in, another junta came in and, had removed the junta that had removed Christian Kabore. Guinea's, I think, former president, Alpha Conde, I think they're still holding him as well. And we know what happened in Mali. They removed Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, and he went to, was it the UAE or Saudi Arabia to be treated? He died there earlier this year in January. So a lot has been happening, and ECOWAS is worried. And now they've formed a peacekeeping force. And analysts are saying we don't see how this is going to work. So they agreed in a summit that was held last week to establish a regional force to fight terrorism and restore democracy. Okay, so that's really good. So this force is meant to fight terrorism, so a concerted effort. I don't know how this is going to work, because a country like Nigeria, and I keep referring to Nigeria because we know it is the motherboard for Boko Haram and this other, and ISWAP, which now has spread its tentacles across other states around that area. They have not been very cooperative. There are countries even that offered to come in and help President Buhari to fight terrorism. He was not very receiving of these kinds of offers. So I think for the war to really be won, because this is a serious matter, there has to be a concerted effort between the member states, and they must speak one language if they really want to get rid of this menace of terrorism and these other extremist activities in West African states. Go into Nigeria, see how the government has been handling. We know a lot of these people have been accused to come from the north of the country. And from what I've been reading, Nigerians are saying that the reason why President Buhari does not want to go very hard on these people is because they come from his own area, which I have nothing to say to that. So what I'm saying is the attitude of the leaders of these countries must match. It must be in a synergy for you to be able to win this war against these extremist groups in West Africa. And ECOWAS has suffered. And on top of that, now you want to restore democracy. Okay. So this will be very interesting. So you want to restore democracy by using this regional peacekeeping force. Main works will be to fight terrorism and to restore democracy. And by restoring democracy, they're saying if there's a coup in a country like what we've seen happen in those countries I've mentioned in the last 2 years, I don't know what this regional force is supposed to do. Force its way inside one of the countries in the ECOWAS and do what? Remove the junta, or what happens? So they're working on the modalities, because the principle of non-interference, of sovereignty, you know what that says. The internal affairs of a country, you can't do so much. But that changed, I think, after Rwanda's genocide in 1994, when UN was accused of not doing much, when hundreds of people are being murdered, thousands of people are being murdered. So the principle of sovereignty under UN, I think, changed a little, and they said countries can actually intervene under humanitarian grounds. And I think we do have such a clause in African Union itself. But we do have that in the African Union itself, and we've seen African Union do nothing when situations require for it to step in and act more than just sending, peacekeeping mission there. So I don't know how this ECOWAS peacekeeping force will be, exercising its mandates. They're working on the modalities, and the defense chiefs from these member states shall be meeting in January to discuss the way forward for the peacekeeping force. This is something that I'll be interested to see. Because, even within ECOWAS itself, they don't agree. They have some bickering and some misunderstandings within themselves, and especially some disquiet even among some members, and of course these countries that have had coups, and they have their in-house fightings. I don't know how this is going to happen, but I think it is a good move. I'd like to see it come to fruition, so I'll be waiting for January to see how the modalities and how they will, this way forward, they're saying, this will work out for them. But I think it's a good idea. And then can they start with going to Nigeria to start, fighting this terrorism from there? And then Mali, we know, is ravaged, part of it, by terrorists, and I think Burkina Faso as well, and other countries, and Cameroon itself also has some terrorist activities going on there, from Boko Haram to others. And speaking about Cameroon, now the government of President Paul Biya, the military, has taken over the construction of roads linking the troubled western regions of Nigeria, and what it said were repeated separatist attacks. And some of these regions, of course, are in the western part of the country, where we know the western regions, where we know the Anglophones have been calling for secession and forming their own country, and they have a name for it, Ambazonia, I think they have a name for it. And there has been increased attacks in these areas. So the construction workers who have been rebuilding and reconstructing and perhaps constructing new roads in this region, according to the government, were being attacked by the separatist, fighters. And a few times they've come out and taken responsibility for the abductions, of some of these construction workers. So the government has decided to take up this matter, and the military to construct roads. And of course the government is saying military is they do have really qualified personnel, and I do agree up to that point. Even here, I think it will be a good idea. We saw President Uhuru Kenyatta attempt to do that, but that was perceived to mean other things. But we saw areas where he put military personnel in charge. We did see some good, significant, changes, because military people, the disciplined forces, like the top tier disciplined force, and so they take command very well. Go dig dams in such and such a place. We need 10 dams in like this couple of days. The military will do that, and this military, especially the one we have in this country, they're qualified, and there are many of them. And we don't have a war going on. We're helping in keeping peace, in neighboring countries and other missions. So the rest of these men and women in uniform, I've always thought we could harness, and some of the skills that they have some of the most qualified personnel in different sectors that could be very useful for this country. We could use these skills instead of just them sitting in a barracks, making us feel safe. That is a good thing. But we could engage them in ways that the larger community of the Republic of Kenya could benefit. Now, Paul Biya, as bad as he is, he understands this. But, the situation in the western regions of Cameroon has necessitated this, because civilian workers are being attacked by the separatist groups, allegedly. That is what the government is saying. The Anglophones are attacking these people. And we know this conflict that has existed. The renewed one started in 2017, but the history dates back to so many years ago. We will not get about 50 years ago. We will not get back to that. Right now, after Britain left and all that, They were handed over, they were asked if they wanted to stay with this country or form their own country. They decided to join, and then I don't know what happened. So it's a whole history. And Cameroon was colonized by two countries, part of it by French, the other part by Britain. So that's why you have the larger part, they're Francophones, and the other smaller part in the western region, they are the Anglophones. So the Anglophones have been feeling the kind of things we were talking about here yesterday while we were looking at the latest from Ethiopia, the Oromo Liberation, OLA. Is it OLA? Yeah, from the Oromia region. They've, TPLF stopped fighting, but it appears they are continuing to fight because they feel that their voice is not being heard, and there are a couple of things that they are unhappy about, and maybe the marginalization, and perhaps they feel that they're not fully included in and perhaps there's some level of inequality. I don't know what the problem is, but as I was saying yesterday, it will be nice, it will be for the best interest of the country if they can learn to talk, to communicate, to just have a conversation instead of taking arms and fighting. Because if you take arms and fight, then the government will not come smiling at you. They will come with arms and fight back, and then everybody will be losing. So it is unnecessary. You're one people, you're one country, you're not seeking to leave the way the Anglophones wants to leave Cameroon. Instead, you have some grievances that you want addressed. There is a better way to do that. Diplomacy, soft diplomacy. You can talk. You can talk, and the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed should also be willing to just listen, even if he does not agree with some of the things that these people are raising, but he should be willing. I think that is one of the key characteristics of a leader. You have to be accommodating. You must be accommodating. These are your people. You keep fighting them, and they keep fighting you back. The country is losing, and I think you've lost so much during this 2-year unnecessary war that was happening with the Tigray region. So the Oromia, region, and a few of them have a problem. I think you could just sit down with your people, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and just listen to them, even if you don't agree with what they are fighting for or what they're saying. But sometimes just listening and making sure you let them know, as much as I don't agree with some of the things, and perhaps some of the issues you're raising might not be as legitimate, but I hear you. It's important for persons to feel like they are being heard. So the same thing. I was just making reference what is happening in Cameroon, but the situation is different. The Anglophones wants to leave. TPLF did not want to leave Ethiopia. The OLA do not want to leave Ethiopia, but the Anglophones want to leave Cameroon and form their own country, and they have a name for it. Like I've said, they call it Ambazonia. Okay. And so this there were renewed fightings that started in 2017, and I think the protest was started by teachers and judicial officers, like the lawyers, because the government had said now the whole country shall be using French as the official language to communicate, to teach in schools and to use in courts. And the lawyers and teachers from the Anglophone region said, hey, we don't speak French, we speak English in this part of Cameroon. And so there were issues with bilingualism there, but I think later on there were some conversations that were held a couple of years later, and now earlier this year the government insisted that that bilingualism, they should start enhancing it so that you can speak whatever language you speak, but you're still one Cameroon. But the Anglophones don't want to hear that. They want to go and form their own country. So there has been fighting, and these separatists, others have decided to take up arms and fight the government of Paul Biya, and that has continued, but with very little results. Paul Biya is not willing to offer them this referendum that they want to secede, and so I guess they will continue. So the army has taken over the construction of roads in that area. And we know one of the key things, when I was explaining the story, the Ethiopian conflict, the people in the Anglophone region, they feel marginalized. systematically and otherwise. They feel very much marginalized, and they feel as though they're being treated as second-class citizens in Cameroon. And so they feel, if you cannot treat us right, if we cannot have similar access to certain things in this country, then, I mean, there's no point in us being here. We might as well just go and form our own country. So there are some deep-seated levels of inequalities, and even when it comes to developmental agenda from the people who we've been talking to, they're saying that part of Cameroon has been marginalized. But now the government is coming in to construct roads and to reconstruct, and you all are fighting these people. So why can't you let the government do what it's supposed to do? Why can't you let your roads be constructed? Your children have been out of school for a long time, because we know a lot of these schools were burnt down, hospitals were burnt down. Of course, the government forces are fighting the separatists on this side, but the separatists themselves are also equally contributing to this insecurity that has made life unbearable in the Anglophone region. So it's a losing battle. Can you let the roads be built so that you can have good access around that region? You keep fighting, then what will happen? And you will continue crying about being marginalized, about having poor infrastructure, and yet you're fighting the same people who want to bring these changes in your area. Okay, I'll leave that story there, but that is what the government is saying. It will be interesting to hear what the Anglophones themselves are saying. Very well, so now we also have another problem in Chad, before I get into the story of South Sudan that I find to be interesting. All right. Okay, Serawit Bekele, thank you for joining. Yes, keep giving your thoughts there. I will read them shortly. I appreciate you for joining, and keep letting me know what you think. You're from Ethiopia. I'll read that very shortly. Okay. So lawyers in Chad, the Secretary of the Bar Association in Chad, they are saying they're going to appeal the prosecution of the October 20th demonstrators. Remember, there were some Chadians who were demonstrating against the military rule in Chad. Remember, President Idris Deby died just a day after winning another term in office, and then he decided to go join his forces on the front line, who've been fighting extremist groups, the same as the other, we've been talking about in the Sahel region. So he was murdered on the front line before he could even take his oath of office again. But he had led that country for a good amount of years. So immediately, the country's leadership, orchestrated by France, I don't have proof, but absolutely, President Macron showed up, and immediately his son was installed as the interim president. And this was supposed to take place for a limited time as they worked out modalities of the country, organizing for another election so that they can go back to the civilian rule in Chad after Idris Deby was murdered. Instead, this person, Mohammed, the junta, he was coronated, and his mandate was renewed by 2 extra years. So Chadians were not happy, and they said, no, we should be allowed and given a right to go and elect our own leader. And so for that reason, we'll take on the streets and we will protest, because we want some changes and we would like to have a legitimately elected a leader by the people of Chad. And you cannot impose on us Mohammed Idris Deby Itno, the son of Idris Deby. All right. So the people who were protesting, about 401 of them were arrested. Now 262 have been sentenced, following deadly protest. And in this deadly protest, a lot of civilians were shot at by the security forces in Chad, and they were murdered. But what is very interesting is I did not hear any condemnation from France, which has been condemning the murder of civilians and other extrajudicial killings that have been happening in Mali, that have been reported since the Russian mercenaries, set up shop there and is now trying to help Mali with the security situation. But they're usually very loud in talking what is happening in these areas that now they have relationships. But there are some things that are happening in Chad, and they're very mum. And I think it is the double standard when you look at this. When you look at these stories, as much as they're sort of similar in nature. Chad, Idris died. The son came in power, and constitutionally, as I've said here before, the Speaker of Parliament was the one supposed to head that country for an interim period as the country prepared for another election. But he was supposed to be the interim leader in Chad. Instead, they skipped all these people who could have replaced Idris and decided to impose his son on the people of Chad. And I said, when he was being coronated, France's president, Emmanuel Macron, was even present and gave his blessing. So that tells you who is pulling the strings. But in Mali, and now they've extended his term in office illegally. But when Mali tries to do that, it is a problem. France is up in arms. These other countries are up in arms. I'm not saying what is happening in Mali is right, but I'm just saying if wrong is wrong, the wrongs should be wrong and should be, cut across. You can't choose and pick, what is wrong in one area and what should be wrong in another area, Chad. If that is your approach, and that is where Mali, I think, got annoyed with France, and now we see Burkina Faso as well. They're even closing down the, French's media houses there. The RFI, the radio, they closed down. And Mali as well did that. So if you're treating Chad differently, and what is happening in Chad is not much different from what is happening here, because Muhammad did not get that position in a way that is constitutionally right, even within the constitution of Chad. But we're here also, and we've imposed ourselves after we carried out a coup, and now we are here anyway. So Chad is not better than us as far as following the constitution and having the leadership that they have, the same way we do. I think that's how they feel. I'm just trying to understand how they reason out this thing. So they feel France and other international partners are a bit, they're doing some bit of doublespeak, not even a bit, a lot of it, and they're handling the situation of Chad differently, and they're putting pressure on them to try to do different, but they're not demanding the same from Chad's leadership. So that is what is happening. So Chad now has on Monday they were sentenced because they were protesting against the military rule. And France is quiet. So France, where are your voices as far as human rights abuses and freedoms to protest? I think that is something that the Western democracy values encompasses a lot. So why are you not speaking when these protesters are now being sent to jail because they're protesting against this leadership that they feel has been imposed on them? And they're saying, can you not move the goalpost? We are supposed to have elections this time. The interim leadership was supposed to end within this period, but instead you have extended now for another 2 years, and that's not what we want. That is not the kind of democracy we want here in Chad. And if anything, we had enough of you, Dad. So can we be allowed to choose our leader? And so that is that. So anyway, the lawyers there would have said that they will appeal for their prosecution. So we'll see how that works. Now in South Africa, the far-right gunman who killed South African anti-apartheid hero Chris Hani, the story has been making rounds, finally was released. Remember, the judge had ordered, South Africa's highest court ordered Wallo's released within 10 days, and that ruling was made on the 21st of November, and that elicited a lot of bad memories for the people of South Africa. And Chris Hani was regarded as one of the key leaders who was speaking out and who were fighting the apartheid government, and he was in fact revered, like next to Nelson Mandela was Chris Hani. So he was murdered in 1993 by this white supremacist. That is who he is, and he was sentenced to life, and now he's been allowed parole. He's left. His name is Janus Wallus. He's 69 now. And he shot Hani in 1993 in a failed attempt to derail South Africa's transition from a white minority government to democratic rule. And the killing still evokes a lot of emotions in South Africa. You know, South Africans, especially the black South Africans, have never really healed from the aftermath of apartheid. It still haunts them. Look at how they act. Look at the xenophobic attacks that we see them. That is misplaced anger to the wrong people. I'm not saying for them to go kill and maim anybody else, but I'm just saying, so there's still, this is just the aftermath of many years of being oppressed, of many years of being made to feel like you don't even fit in within your own country. And somebody like Janus could not imagine living in a South Africa where a black man actually could be a president. Can you imagine? Can you imagine in an African country? South Africa's story, sometimes when you sit down and just think about it, just slowly, you know, as an African, it's, you know, it usually doesn't sit right, you know, within me. Can you imagine just people coming in the same way we were colonized, but this one was extended for a long period of time. So the minority people decide how your life is going to be, where you are going to live. And do you know, even up to today, there are some estates in South Africa, some area codes where you will not find a black person owning a piece of property or living there. It is still majorly white. So the segregation is still there. You know, it might not be as much as it were during apartheid, but it's still there. And this is just when such a thing happens. Now they're releasing this person that murdered Chris Hani, that shot at Chris Hani in 1993. It evokes, and you can see, you know, the wounds are still quite fresh, and it evokes a lot of emotions because a lot of these things are still our reality within South Africa. So as much as South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and they talked things over, and I guess people had to move on, but there are some deeply seated problems and some deeply seated trauma that the larger majority of the black people in South Africa who lived through this apartheid, and the young people who were born in this, is, you know, there is something that they still have to work through. They've not really gotten over. So this only triggers, you know, those memories that they would rather not talk about. So I don't know if it was a right decision by the you know, South Africa's court to release him, but now he's been out. Remember, after the court announced that, a couple of days later, he was stabbed inside the jail cell that he was in. Obviously, we can know the motive of that stabbing, but now he was released yesterday, and we've been seeing some protest against that release. Okay. South Sudan, South Sudan, South Sudan. And South Sudan, this time, where is that story? Where SPLM was having a meeting, and President Salva Kiir was endorsed as the he was endorsed by SPLM as the party's chairperson and the flag bearer for the upcoming general election in 2025. Hold on. You were supposed to have elections in 2024. No? Now it has been moved to 2025? Or what happened? Because the last time, the last update I had on this, you know, South Sudan was supposed to go to its elections at the end of 2024. So maybe they've put it at the beginning of 2025. I hope that is the case. But even with that, until it happens with South Sudan, I really can't bet on that. I can't bet on them actually having an election, because the manner in which they have been acting, the leadership of South Sudan has been acting, there's no commitment of actually wanting to have a transition, because the chaos in South Sudan and the way things are works perfectly for a lot of these people in the leadership position in South Sudan. And so now, while they were having this meeting in the SPLM on Tuesday, and they endorsed President Salva Kiir as the party's chairperson and the flag bearer for the upcoming general elections in 2025, one of the participants in that meeting, a ranking member in SPLM, said that, you know, Dr. John Garang had entrusted the nation to him. You know, he was given the mandate, and Dr. John Garang predicted to party members in Rumbek that Comrade Salva Kiir would lead South Sudanese to independence. That is what Daniel Awet Akot, who is the National Liberation Council deputy chairperson, said. That Dr. Garang predicted to members in Rumbek that Comrade Salva Kiir would lead South Sudanese to independence. Did he not? I think he did that. But did he say now, after he's led them to independence, he can stay there? For how long? Forever. He can keep postponing elections. All right? Leading the country to independence, that he did. And then what? All right? And then what? So I think it is this kind of a mentality. Now I get it now. Because when you have such talks that Dr. John Garang had entrusted the nation to him, it's like he is the only person who can lead the country of South Sudan. You know, that is such a weighty statement. He entrusted the nation to him, and I do understand the turmoil that South Sudan has gone through, and I won't entirely blame President Salva Kiir. I think all of these top politicians in South Sudan are responsible for the mess they got themselves in. The first vice president, Riek Machar, and all other stakeholders. Nobody can escape responsibility of where South Sudan is today, because they failed to do their job. They failed to live by the spirit of 2018, revitalized peace agreement and other agreements that have been done since then, and other things they're supposed to do to make sure that South Sudan stabilizes and South Sudanese are able to finally have a peaceful country. And so when you have this level of entitlement, because you feel the nation was entrusted to you, and that's why they act the way they act, because they feel, and this is not just President Salva Kiir, but the rest of them, they feel that it has to be them. And we've seen this attitude being exhibited. And as even President Salva Kiir says is running in 2025, Dr. Riek Machar shall also be running. I don't know if there is any other person who will also be running in 2025, but he'll also be running. So this will again create another platform for another, I think, ramble. South Sudan was supposed to have had elections years back, and they've kept pushing it. And President Salva Kiir in 2019 said the reason why the elections cannot happen is because the country is not stable. Okay, if that is the reason why, then why can't we create an enabling environment for peace to coexist? Instead, what now we are seeing is an increased communal fightings, as I read to you in one of the news items here, that is now causing a lot of concern, continued violence in the Upper Nile state. And what surprised me is what President Salva Kiir said. He said he cannot, I have to quote the right thing. He said he cannot intervene in that. Yes, it's right here. President Salva Kiir said he cannot stop the war in the Upper Nile region. And while he is saying this, the Upper Nile state government said it was helpless. So it is appealing for the national government, President Salva Kiir, it is appealing to you to come and help stop the violence in the restive region. Instead, President Salva Kiir is not very clear why he made these remarks, but he said that there was fighting going on in the eastern Nuer area and the Cholo kingdom, and that those who are fighting are our brothers, and called on the leaders to stop the war to bring peace to the people. I think these are armed fightings that have been ongoing, these communal wars that have been going on. In South Sudan, there's a proliferation of arms, and a lot of the young people who are in the cantonment centers, training centers, who others left. It is said a lot of them left with arms, and so when they went back to their communities, they went and they started setting up this militia. And we know the issue of militias in South Sudan, where almost every leading figure in that country have their own militias, and there are also other groups that are formed that continue to fund insecurity in South Sudan. So the president is saying he cannot stop the war. So if you cannot stop these communal wars that have been going on, because you're saying these are your brothers. So what should happen now? As much as you're saying that you don't want to take the country back to war and revenge on those who are causing the problems, but something has to be done. As you know, something has to be done. People's lives must be protected. So if you cannot stop the war here in your country, your forces cannot do anything to ensure the safety of the people of South Sudan, and yet the country is willing to spend $6.69 million US dollars to train and take up your forces to go secure the lives of the people of Democratic Republic of Congo. President Salva Kiir, explain to me how that is supposed to make sense. If you're refusing to take action that will ensure that your people they live together in peace and they can be assured of sleeping in their houses in peace at night, you're saying you can't stop the war and you can't intervene, but your soldiers are going to stop the war and intervene for the people of Democratic Republic of Congo, and what one of the generals there was saying to ensure that the people are able to go back to their homes and sleep in peace. But you can't assure that. You can't assure your people that. What kind of callous leadership is this? Where is your priorities? And I think that is what has always bothered me with the leadership of South Sudan. The priorities are just upside down. $6.69 million US dollars. It's not a lot of money in the scheme of things, and when you look at the bigger nations, people have spent more. I'm sure even Kenya will spend more in terms of preparing and sending our troops there under the East African community. But South Sudan, that cannot be your priority. The insecurity in South Sudan should be your priority. And I understand that South Sudan is part of the East African community, and every nation is supposed to be contributing to this force. But the timing is wrong. When you have an increased level of continuous violence that is being fanned, and as the commander-in-chief, you're telling the people from the Upper Nile state that you cannot do anything to stop this conflict. You cannot intervene. Why can't you intervene? What is it that you know that we don't know? For how long? So they're just supposed to fight it out, and then they get tired, and then what happens? Because you're being told by the leadership of that region that they need your help, but you will not offer it. Instead, you're saying these are our brothers, and so you're calling on the leaders to stop the war and bring peace. I agree, everybody has a part to play, but your first mandate and your first responsibility, President Salva Kiir, is to make sure that your government, and now you have the unified forces that graduated a couple of weeks ago, protect the lives of the people of South Sudan. If you cannot guarantee that, then you have no business sitting there in a meeting, SPLM meeting, and being endorsed to go for another election in 2025. If you cannot guarantee the safety of your people, you have failed. You have failed as a head of state. You have failed miserably. And not just you, because the situation in South Sudan is very complicated. Everybody else that is part of the leadership of South Sudan. So I guess the people of Eastern Nuer and in Cholo kingdoms in the Upper Nile state will have to take care of their own affairs. I guess that's what will happen. And the last story I'd like for us to look at is now these tables that seems to have turned around in Democratic Republic of Congo, because now it is the M23 that is accusing the Democratic Republic of Congo forces. And now the group in the DRC has condemned genocide and targeted killings against the Tutsi community by government forces and its allies in the east. The M23, slowly, I know we've been talking about these things, and then last week, President Paul Kagame sort of opened up, and we got to understand what really Rwanda is thinking about this conflict and its position on this conflict, that it has been accused for a long time of funding, but of course Rwanda has been denying these allegations. So now the M23 rebel group is saying, wait, the Democratic Republic of Congo is actually army is committing genocide and targeted killings against the Tutsi community by government forces and its allies, which will be the FDLR, that Paul Kagame has had a problem with, because the majority Hutus, and they're said to have formed after the Rwanda genocide, the remnants of the ones who participated in the Rwandan genocide in 1994, they went and regrouped inside the refugee camps and they formed this group. And so this has been the reason why Paul Kagame has been accused of supporting the M23, which majority of them are Tutsis. So now this rebel group, the M23, is saying the Rwandan government, with its allied forces in the east, I guess the FDLR, have been committing genocide and have been carrying out targeted killings against the Tutsi community in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It said the government's coalition forces had on Tuesday attacked their position in Buiza and its surroundings in total breach of the current ceasefire. The M23 said government allied forces have killed innocent civilians, destroying houses, looting and slaughtering their cattle, noting that the ongoing attacks had displaced civilians, wounded by many. The group also said it will not stand by and watch. This is M23 speaking. And while we were having this conversation yesterday, I think we were looking at transitional diplomacy or something like that. And this is just it. Because yesterday, what we were talking about was different. The information yesterday was that M23 has said they're willing to put down the arms and they're willing to have a conversation with the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And now today they're saying that we cannot stand by and watch as civilians' populations get killed, adding that it is ready to intervene and stop these horrific massacres. Exactly the same thing that they have been doing. So you see the heart of the problem in the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the involvement of the M23 rebels. I think they feel like they have to protect the lives of the, the DR itself has its own indigenous population of the Tutsis. They do have that. And so, according to M23, the DRC government is targeting now its own population, the Tutsi population community in the DRC. So M23 is saying now, this is our people now. If you keep fighting, we will not just stand by and watch that happen. We will have to intervene and protect a Tutsi. Ethnic balkanization. So the army of the Democratic Republic of Congo has not spoken about the allegations, but had last week accused the M23 of killing dozens of civilians. Remember the one that I think I've been seeing varied figures. The first we heard was that 50 people were murdered, and the government said it's 100. Then now I was reading some place yesterday, it's like around 300 civilians have been killed. And this happened last week after M23 violated the ceasefire agreement. And so I don't know if these allegations the M23 is leveling was a retaliation from the government forces and its allied, and its allied forces, FDLR. It has to be that went and now targeted, from what M23 is saying, this Tutsi community in the Democratic Republic of Congo. President Uhuru Kenyatta just concluded a mediation process that ended. Was it the same Tuesday, right? And now look at what we are talking about here. I think diplomacy in transition, or transition diplomacy. I think President Uhuru Kenyatta, you might need to start another round of these negotiations and this mediation, because now, if M23 is now the one which feels like it has to protect a section of civilians in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think it just goes to back to the conversation and something that we've been talking about here, especially Dr. David Matsanga. He has been very clear as far as the sincerity of the stakeholders. And the last time we were having this conversation, I think one of our panelists, Omar from London, I think she reminded us that all eyes are being trailed on M23. But we are forgetting that the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is also being accused of being in bed, of aiding or funding another rebel group. So if you don't want any rebel group, if a government is not supposed to be sponsoring any rebel group, then every government, be it Rwanda, be it Democratic Republic of Congo or any other country, should not be supporting. And I think that should be the baseline. But we want to point fingers on one side while the other side is doing different. So even President Felix Tshisekedi has been accused of being dishonest, of being dishonest. And by the way, he has not come out to say he's not supporting the FDLR. He's never refuted these claims. You know, we know Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has refuted supporting M23. He has denied these claims, but the other day he said, hey, and by the way, there are around 400 rebel groups in that region, so why are you only picking on M23? So from what he was saying, you can conclude on what he was not saying. I'm just saying, and I'm not, I'm not trying to say anything to that, but you know, you can conclude for yourself. So everybody has to take responsibility, and if this is true from what M23 is saying, then the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is also not honest. It's also not honest, and you can't be quiet. You have to speak up, because the progress that have been made will not hold. And we have to keep going round and round and round, and this problem will never get solved. So every stakeholder in this conflict, I think they have to get serious, and they have to realize these are people. These are people that are dying. These are not just statistics of things we are counting. These are lives of people who are dying. These are people who must leave their homes and go find safety havens and walk through the mountains and the forest. Have you seen the images coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo? Women and children and men. It is not fair for these people. So I think there has to be some level of commitment and seriousness and honesty within the players, so that the issues that really are at the core of this conflict can be addressed. And I'll say it, and I'll repeat it, and we've said it before. Nobody wants to look at the issue. Ethnic balkanization is at the center of this conflict, among other factors. The rivalry between Rwanda and Uganda also is playing into it. But there are other factors. But ethnic balkanization is one of the things that, an ugly truth that the Democratic Republic of Congo must sit with itself and see, how do we coexist? How do we address this matter? And how do we work it out in a way an outside person cannot use it to have us fighting each other, or to, to put us at crosshairs? Because now if the government is being accused of killing its own people, sorry, because it's coming from a particular community, these are claims. These are claims, and the Democratic Republic of Congo's government have not said anything, has not responded to these claims by M23. But this is a serious matter. This is a serious matter. So I hope that the mediation team will take up on this. And President Uhuru Kenyatta, you have your work cut out for you, but you know, you're the right person for that job. So continue mediating, and hopefully we will get the end of we'll get to the end of this problem, and we can, the people of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, who have suffered immensely, one day can look to have a peaceful coexistence within themselves. That is, our prayers are here, and I think the rest of the world, and especially in Africa. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. I've done almost an hour and a half. That's enough for right now. Thank you so much. This has been Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogotu. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you here later. Bye-bye for now.